What if everything you've been waiting for is already surrounding you? Not in the future, not as a reward for more effort, but quietly, invisibly, already forming itself around your presence. Maybe you haven't noticed, not because it isn't here, but because your eyes are still searching for something loud, something external. And that search, that impulse to check, to chase, to confirm, is the vibration that whispers, "It's not here yet." But what if it is? Maybe you've been taught to look for proof, for signs, for breakthroughs. But what if the real breakthrough is recognizing what's already arrived? There's a sacred irony here. The ones who are closest to their manifestations are often the ones still doubting them, still asking, still waiting, still looking. But the truth? Manifestation doesn't announce itself like a drumbeat. It arrives like breath, constant, unnoticed, already part of you. Neville Goddard said, "Signs follow, they do not precede." This is not poetry, this is a law. It means you're not supposed to go looking for evidence before feeling it's done. You're supposed to feel it, and then you'll see it. But most of us were conditioned to doubt our own inner knowing. We were taught to check the bank account, to read others' faces, to analyze every outcome, and so we delay our own recognition. We wait for the world to reflect something back before choosing to feel arrived. And yet that very waiting becomes the block. Dr. Joe Dispenza shows us that the brain doesn't perceive reality as it is. It filters everything through familiar emotional signatures, which means until you feel worthy, your mind literally cannot register what has changed. Even if you're standing in the middle of your answered prayer, you'll miss it. You'll call it coincidence. You'll say, "This isn't enough." You'll keep searching because the self who receives hasn't yet awakened in you. And that's the paradox. The more you chase confirmation, the more distant the truth feels. The more you analyze, the more confused you become. You try to manifest from effort, but manifestation responds to identity. Not what you want, Asna, but who you're being. So maybe the deepest truth is this. You've already manifested more than you realize, but your perception hasn't caught up with your reality. This isn't a punishment, it's a threshold. You don't need to make more effort, you don't need to figure it out. You need to remember how to see. Like standing in sunlight with your eyes closed. You may call it darkness, but your skin knows. The warmth knows. Something has already changed, but you haven't opened your eyes to it yet. This video is not here to give you something new. It's here to help you recognize what's already yours, to reprogram the lens of your awareness, from searching to seeing, from longing to acknowledgement, from effort to arrival. And as you walk with me through these 10 quiet, powerful signs, let each one be a mirror, showing you not what's missing, but what's already here. You're not lost. You're just remembering. And remembering is how you begin to see. What you don't acknowledge, you lose. How many times have you received exactly what you asked for, only to overlook it, downplay it, or dismiss it as chance? You call it luck, or a small coincidence, or maybe even forget it happened. But the truth is, the universe doesn't withhold your desires. It delivers them quietly, wrapped in moments so subtle that only a still heart can recognize them. And when we fail to acknowledge what has arrived, we unknowingly push it back into the realm of absence. Not because it disappears, but because we stop vibrating with the truth of it. Neville Goddard said, "You will never find what you seek. You can only find what you assume. Assumption is the doorway, and when you walk through it, reality rearranges itself to match the self you've chosen to be. But when you keep searching for proof, what you're really doing is assuming it's still missing. You look and you look, but your looking is not innocent. It is saturated with the frequency of absence. There's a mechanism in your brain called the reticular activating system. It filters the world so that you only perceive what matches your dominant beliefs. That means if you've been assuming nothing works, then even when something does, you won't see it. Not because it isn't working, but because your lens is fogged with disbelief. You could be walking through doors you once begged to open and still feel stuck because you haven't owned the identity of the one who receives. And that's the silent tragedy of manifestation. We normalize our miracles. We adapt so quickly that the extraordinary becomes invisible. We forget how far we've come because the moment we integrate a new state, our mind files it under ordinary. But just because you've adapted doesn't mean it wasn't divine, so go back, trace your life. Remember 3 things that once felt impossible. and realize they're now part of your daily life. Maybe it's the relationship that feels peaceful, the money that arrives more often, or the inner calm that once seemed unreachable. These are not flukes. They are fulfilled assumptions. You created them, and then forgot to recognize them. Gratitude is not just a virtue, it is a spotlight. It shines on what you've already manifested and brings it fully into form, not as something fragile to cling to, but as something rooted, grounded, claimed. What you don't acknowledge, you lose. Not because the universe takes it away, but because your identity slips back into not enough, and that slip is the only loss that ever truly happens. You're not missing the signs. You're missing your own power to name them. What if your life is already full, and all that's left is to see it? There is a kind of impatience that wears the mask of faith. It speaks softly, wrapped in spiritual language, saying things like, "I'm waiting for divine timing," or "The universe knows when I'm ready." But beneath those words often lives a quiet vibration of doubt, the belief that something is still missing, that your current state is somehow not enough. It is a subtle form of disbelief, a refined way of saying, "It hasn't happened yet." And yet, in the language of creation, that statement becomes a command. Keep it away. Impatience is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like endless study, obsessive journaling, constant visualization. Not because you're aligned, but because you're afraid to stop. You think if you pause, it will all slip away. But manifestation doesn't respond to motion. It responds to being. It is not the restless mind that brings things to life, but the still heart that knows it's already done. Neville Goddard inverted the common interpretation of stillness. When he said, "Be still and know that you are," he was not referring to passive waiting. He was describing the stillness that comes from recognition, from knowing that creation is complete. To be still is not to delay, but to embody. It is the silence after realization, not the pause before it. From a neurological perspective, chronic impatience activates the body's stress chemistry. When you are waiting, your body believes you are incomplete. Cortisol rises, the prefrontal cortex and the part of your brain responsible for awareness dims. You literally lose access to the field of infinite possibilities because your nervous system is in survival mode. The more you try to rush divine order, the more your biology mirrors lack. And so the invitation is simple but profound. Move from waiting to remembering. When you wait, you affirm separation. When you remember, you dissolve it. Feel your wish as memory, not as hope. Hope keeps it far. Memory brings it close. When you feel as though it has already happened, your nervous system finally relaxes, and that relaxation is the signal of arrival. There's a rhythm in nature that reflects this truth. The seed doesn't look at the clock. The flower doesn't argue with the soil. The sun does not check whether it's time to rise. Everything unfolds from an inner knowing that timing is not external. It is inherent in the essence of what already is. When you become still in awareness, you enter that rhythm. You stop measuring time and start embodying truth. So ask yourself gently, is my waiting sacred, or is it disguised fear? Because the one who truly believes no longer waits. They rest. They breathe differently. They speak from fulfillment, not towards it. And life, hearing that tone, rearranges to match. Looking at the clock doesn't make the seed sprout. It only exhausts the gardener. But when you let go of the need to measure, you finally allow the miracle to grow in peace and to reveal itself in the silence you once feared. There is a deep and often uncomfortable truth hidden behind the idea of effort. Most of us have been trained to believe that the more we do, the more we earn. That results are the outcome of sweat, struggle, and strategy. But manifestation does not respond to how hard you try. It responds to who you are. And the gap between doing and being is where most seekers stay stuck, measuring their worth by effort, unaware that the universe only ever reflects state. Neville Goddard said, "You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are aware of being." And this changes everything, because it means that your desire alone has no magnetic power unless it is wrapped in assumption. Wanting is a signal of separation. Being is the key that opens the door. If your self-concept is rooted in trying, then everything you do will vibrate with the assumption that it's not here yet. You may be visualizing, affirming, scripting, but beneath it all lives a quiet identity, the one who needs to do those things to become complete. And life, being a mirror, reflects not your rituals but your root. It doesn't respond to the surface, but to the frequency beneath. This is echoed in behavioral science through what is known as the Galatea effect, the phenomenon where your belief about yourself shapes your performance, your results, and even how others treat you. When you believe, deeply and without exception, that you are the one who already lives the life you desire, the world begins to respond in kind, not because you earned it, but because your vibration left it no choice. What would shift if for just one day you assumed that every single thing you encounter is evidence of your fulfilled state, that the stranger's smile, the email, the delay, the breeze, all of it is a mirror showing you the vibration you're radiating, not to punish or reward you, but simply to reveal, not to give you feedback on your effort, but to reflect your being. The mirror never lies. It cannot show what you pretend. It cannot echo what you perform. It only reveals what you carry. So when you look around and feel disconnected, the question is not, what else do I need to do, but rather, who am I being right now? Because mirrors don't reward effort, they reflect identity. And once your identity is settled, the reflection becomes inevitable, without striving, without convincing, without needing anyone else to validate it. This is not passive, this is power, not the kind of power that moves mountains through force, but the kind that bends reality through alignment. So the question becomes tender and exact. Can you walk through your day as the one who already has what you once begged for? Can you stop proving and start embodying? Because when you do, the mirror has no choice. It shows you exactly what you've become. Most people are waiting for the external shift, the bank balance to rise, the partner to arrive, the circumstance to change, before they believe their manifestation is working. But the truth is, it always begins within. Not as a dramatic sign, not as a sudden miracle, but as a subtle, almost invisible shift in the atmosphere of your being. Manifestation does not begin with appearances. It begins with emotional weather. There are days when nothing outside seems different, but inside, you feel lighter. You wake up with a sense of quiet confidence, a softness in your chest, a peace that you can't quite explain. There's no big event to mark it, but something inside you has loosened. That's not random. That's the first sign. That's the proof. You've shifted frequencies, and your world, though not yet rearranged on the surface, is already responding in structure. Neville Goddard taught, change your conception of yourself, and you will change everything about you. But that change doesn't announce itself like a thunderclap. It whispers. It feels like relief, like detachment, like the moment you no longer need what you used to chase. That's how you know it's begun. Not because the world shouted yes, but because your nervous system did. Dr. Joe Dispenza explains that our emotions are the chemical signatures of our thoughts, meaning when your emotional baseline changes, it signals a new mental reality. You've begun thinking differently without even realizing it. You're no longer rehearsing the old pain, the old story, the old pattern, and your body, your field, your aura, it notices. It records the new code. But if you dismiss that shift because there's no external proof yet, you short-circuit the process. You climb halfway up the mountain and declare there's no summit. You call the calm a coincidence. And so the field pauses, not because it's judging you, but because you've stopped speaking its language. What would happen if instead you began tracking your emotional weather the way you track your goals? What if peace became your milestone? If ease became your evidence? What if, instead of looking for the manifestation in the world, you began to feel it in the rhythm of your breath, in the steadiness of your gaze, in the way you no longer panic when things seem delayed? Reality always warms before it catches fire. The emotional climate changes long before the visible shift arrives. The moment you stop needing proof, you become it. The moment you feel safe, even without the outcome begins to move toward you, quietly and with purpose. So stop asking where it is, and start noticing how you feel. Because the first sign is always emotional. It's not the event, it's the preparation of your inner sky. And maybe, just maybe, your sunrise has already begun. You're just learning how to feel the light before you see it. There's a moment in every journey when you begin to wonder, have I really changed? And often the answer is yes, profoundly so, but your brain has already adapted. The shift you once longed for has become your new normal, and because it no longer gives you the emotional high of contrast or surprise, you question whether anything has happened at all. This is the dopamine mirage. the illusion that nothing is changing simply because it no longer feels new. As humans, we're wired for novelty. The brain's reward system floods us with dopamine when something fresh, unexpected, or victorious happens, but the same system quickly resets. This is known in psychology as hedonic adaptation, the tendency to return to an emotional baseline even after significant positive change. You get the raise, the relationship, the breakthrough, and then, days or weeks later, it feels like just another part of life. The miracle fades, not because it left, but because you stopped seeing it. Neville Goddard hinted at this truth when he explained that fulfilled states become natural. The more your manifestation integrates, the less dramatic it becomes. You don't feel fireworks every time you breathe. And yet, breath is the foundation of life. In the same way, when the new identity becomes familiar, the evidence becomes subtle, not because it's gone, but because you've become it. This is the point where many abandon the path. They confuse emotional neutrality with stagnation. They think, if I don't feel the excitement anymore, it must not be working. But what if that lack of urgency is actually the arrival? What if calm is the new current and your nervous system is simply settling into a higher frequency? Look back, not to relive the past, but to recognize the distance. Revisit your old journals, your former doubts, your earlier prayers. See what once felt impossible that now feels effortless. The things you used to dream about may now be part of your routine. The peace you used to crave may now greet you in the silence between thoughts, but you've stopped celebrating because your brain has normalized the upgrade. That doesn't mean it's not divine. It means you're evolving. And evolution rarely feels like fireworks. It feels like altitude, like a traveler who forgets how high they've climbed because they've adjusted to the air. So before you declare that nothing is happening, ask yourself, what am I no longer panicking about? What am I no longer obsessing over? What feels easy now that once felt unreachable? The absence of urgency is not a problem, it's a sign of arrival. You don't need to chase another high. You just need to recognize that the miracle has become you. There's a moment, often just before everything changes, when it feels like everything is falling apart. Emotions rise without reason. Doubts become louder. Old patterns seem to reappear, not quietly but with force. And in that moment, many turn back. They think, this means I'm regressing. I must be doing something wrong. But what if the chaos isn't the sign of failure, but the proof of transformation? Neville Goddard spoke of this inner turbulence as a necessary phase. The storm comes before the clearing, not as punishment, but as purification. The old identity begins to dissolve, and like anything dying, it resists. It pulls you back into familiar fear, not because it's stronger than your progress, but because it's losing its grip. This emotional dissonance is known in psychology as cognitive dissonance. It happens when the new identity you're stepping into begins to conflict with the beliefs of the old self. The result is discomfort, not because you're broken, but because the subconscious is trying to reconcile who you were with who you're becoming. And that discomfort is sacred. It's the friction between realities. It's the tension of rebirth. It's easy to believe in manifestation when everything feels smooth, but it's in the moments of resistance that your assumptions are truly tested. Do you still assume it's done when it looks like nothing is working? Can you hold your state when the world tries to reflect the opposite? Because that's the bridge, the invisible space between identity and outcome. And what you do there determines what becomes real. Neville called this the bridge of incidents, a sequence of events, both internal and external, that lead you from assumption to fulfillment. But on that bridge, you will meet yourself, your old fears, your old stories, your old doubts, not to punish you, but to be released. And when you meet them, you have a choice, to react and return, or to recognize them as echoes, fading in the presence of your new self. So when fear arises, when chaos surfaces, when things seem to fall apart just as you felt closest, pause, not in panic, but in power. Tell yourself, this is the bridge. This is the reorganization. Because when energy changes, structure must follow. And sometimes structure crumbles before it rebuilds in higher form. When an airplane changes altitude, it passes through turbulence, not because something is wrong, but because it's moving, because it's rising. And the air resists the shift, only until the new height stabilizes. In the same way, when your reality trembles, it's not proof of failure. It's proof that you've left the ground. Sometimes the world doesn't change in big cinematic ways. Sometimes it shifts in whispers, in how someone greets you, in the way a stranger holds the door, in the sudden respect in a voice that used to ignore you. These are not coincidences. They are reflections. When you elevate your self-concept, the outer world adjusts to match. Not because people are different, but because you are. Neville Goddard taught, "Everyone is you pushed out." This is not metaphor. It is mechanics. The assumptions you hold about yourself become instructions for how others respond to you. You don't need to control them. You only need to embody the version of yourself that already commands the treatment you desire, through presence, not performance. It's subtle at first. You don't always notice it happening. Someone smiles more often. Conversations become smoother. People who used to challenge you become neutral or even kind. Invitations arrive without you asking. Opportunities emerge where there was once resistance. And all of it is a mirror, not of effort but of essence. Social psychology confirms this through the Pygmalion effect, the phenomenon where others unconsciously rise or fall to meet the expectations you hold. But those expectations aren't spoken. They are felt. They live in posture, tone, vibration. And when you walk into a room believing you are worthy, safe, valuable, the room listens. This is why deep transformation is rarely dramatic. It's often relational. Life starts to feel smoother, not because the world changed, but because your energy no longer invites the same friction. The arguments fade, the misunderstandings dissolve, the delays stop repeating. And without knowing exactly when it happened, you find yourself surrounded by a gentler world, because you became gentler within. Notice the signs, not through analysis, but through awareness. Has someone started treating you with more reverence without you demanding it? Has support begun to appear in small, consistent ways? Do conversations flow where they used to stall? This is the evidence, not loud, but undeniable. When a radio changes frequency, it doesn't force the station to play a new song. It simply tunes into a different one, and the music changes. In the same way, when your inner identity shifts, the world begins to harmonize, not by force, but by resonance. There comes a point in the journey where the rituals that once felt essential begin to fall away, not because you've failed, but because you've arrived. You're no longer clinging to practices as lifelines, because you've become the embodiment of what you once tried to activate. And in that quiet, something sacred emerges. It can feel confusing at first. You wonder why the urgency to script, affirm, visualize, or meditate has softened. You might even fear you've become lazy or disconnected. But what if this stillness isn't a loss of power, but the result of it? What if it's not detachment from your path, but integration of it? Neville Goddard said, "When desire is fulfilled, you lose the urge." This is not indifference, it's completion. When something becomes natural, you no longer obsess over it. When you breathe, you don't think about every inhale. When you love, you don't constantly question your worthiness to receive it. When you know something is yours, the craving dissolves. Because need belongs to the one who believes they do not yet have. From a neuroscientific perspective, this is how the brain operates when certainty is established. Once a neural pathway becomes stable, the body no longer signals urgency. The stress chemistry fades, the system relaxes, and in that rest, the manifestation begins to settle, not as a hope, but as a reality. This is where true receivers live, in the quiet, not because they stopped caring, but because they no longer need to chase. They are no longer begging reality to change. They are resting in the frequency of the already done. Look at the areas of your life where you feel most peaceful, where you've stopped overthinking, overworking, or overpraying. Those are the areas that are integrating. You don't feel the need to touch the wound once it has healed. You don't keep watering the seed once the tree is bearing fruit. There is a wisdom in your system that recognizes fulfillment. Even if the mind hasn't caught up, the body knows. This doesn't mean you'll never return to techniques. It means you've outgrown the need to rely on them. They become art instead of tools, expression instead of effort, celebration instead of strategy. When the bird finds the branch, it stops flapping, not because it gave up, but because it landed. And sometimes, the deepest sign that you've manifested your desire is the peace that arrives when you no longer need to try. There are moments that arrive without logic. Moments where nothing particularly special has happened, and yet you feel a deep, unshakable sense of peace. You walk into a room and your chest softens. You sit alone and tears form, not from sadness, but from an unexplainable fullness. You feel grateful, though nothing dramatic has shifted. This is not a random mood. It is a message, and it often arrives just before the visible form of your desire. Neville Goddard taught that feeling is the secret. He didn't mean just any feeling. He meant the feeling of the wish fulfilled, that serene confidence, that silent satisfaction, that inexplicable sense that something is done even before it appears. When you feel gratitude without cause, you're not being sentimental. You're aligning with the vibration of completion. Science echoes this with clarity. Gratitude, even when not linked to external events, triggers powerful neurochemical shifts. Oxytocin flows, serotonin rises. Your nervous system moves into coherence. Your body believes it has already received, and in doing so, begins to signal the frequency of receptivity. You become a living match for what you've asked for, not through force, but through felt resonance. And yet most people ignore this. They dismiss these waves of contentment because they're not tied to anything tangible. They ask, "Why am I feeling this way?" and miss the sacred answer. You are feeling this way because the inner reality has already changed. The outer is just catching up. When thunder rolls, you don't see the rain yet, but you know it's coming. In the same way, these emotional waves are not results. They are announcements. Your peace is the thunder. Your joy is the scent of rain in the air. Your sudden clarity, your ease, your laughter without cause. These are not accidents. They are echoes. And the more you notice them, the stronger they become. The secret isn't to chase these feelings, but to honor them when they appear. To recognize them as signs, not symptoms. To let them wash over you without demanding explanation. Because when your body begins to feel the truth of your manifestation before your eyes can see it, that's not illusion, that's prophecy. There is a moment, quiet, unceremonious, when the desire that once consumed you no longer feels urgent. You stop rehearsing it in your mind. You no longer need signs. You forget to visualize, not because you've given up, but because the desire has become part of you. It no longer lives outside, waiting to be chased. It lives within, settled like breath. And in that naturalness lies the final proof. Neville Goddard said, "You will know by the naturalness of it." This is the state where the manifestation stops feeling magical and starts feeling inevitable. You are no longer trying to become, you are simply being. And because of that, the reality must appear. Not as a reward, but as a reflection. This is where the subconscious finally accepts the assumption as true. In psychology, this is called desensitization to the outcome. You are no longer emotionally charged by the idea of having it because your inner world already includes it. There is no more resistance, no more longing, just presence. And presence is the highest frequency of creation. Look back on your life. There are desires that only came to pass once you stopped thinking about them. Once you forgot to try. Once you became busy living. That is not coincidence, it is the rhythm of the law. The moment you stop grasping, the flow begins. Because the energy of grasping says, "I don't have." But the energy of naturalness says, "This is part of who I am." You become the actor who is no longer pretending. The role has fused with the soul. There is no effort, no script, only embodiment. And the world, sensing that embodiment, aligns accordingly. This is the sacred ease of true manifestation. When you no longer track time, when you forget to check, when you feel free even without the form, that's not apathy, that's alignment. That's the vibration that says, "I trust because I already am." And in that state, creation is complete, not because the desire has arrived, but because you have. You're not waiting for the answer, you're living in it. When you stop insisting it's not here, your awareness adjusts. Perception completes the manifestation. Stillness becomes proof. Peace replaces seeking. The sun didn't just rise, you finally turned toward it. And now, you can see what was always yours.